Most people agree that private prisons are bad, but they don't understand just how bad these companies really are. Let's put it this way. When Wall Street banks think that you're too corrupt to do business with, then something's definitely wrong. I have Farron Cousins here with me to talk about private prisons. And, I don't really see this as the banks leaving for any moral reason.
Right.
Look, these are banks that, they pay for fracking. They wash money for terrorists. Back in the last bubble, they kept running it out. They knew what was going to happen to the American public. It's not that they're pulling away from funding prisons because they believe that it's the moral thing to do. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. What they're doing is they're pulling out because there's been massive public pressure over the last 2 years to get them to pull their money out of these programs. Now, there's been public pressure for a lot of the things you said, like, hey, banks, stop funding fossil fuel companies, stop funding fracking. But they figured private prisons was one they could actually easily pull out of and not, maybe gain a few more points with the public. So that's what they're doing. But now these private prisons, to make up for the fact that the banks aren't going to be in charge of their loans and financing them, they're going to D.C. and they're doing two things with their lobbyists. One is obviously they want more government contracts. They want more prisoners coming their way. But two, and this is a sneakier thing, they're lobbying for banking deregulation.
Right.
So the prisons are trying to come out and say, listen, banks, we're on your side. We're paying a couple $1 million to have our guys fight your fight for you.
Yeah, so it's a trade-off. It's really a trade-off. Okay, first of all, the private banks, the banking industry knows if they hang in there long enough, they're going to make a big profit.
Right.
So, yeah, this could be part of the show, which at the end of all of this, the banks are really not going to be that far away from funding these organizations. I think it's interesting to note that some of the banks pulling out and saying, gee whiz, we can't be part of this, are some of the banks that have defrauded consumers by making up fake checking accounts and fake savings accounts completely out of the air. They've gamed the system on mortgages to where consumers were victims there. So if you look at this list, Wells Fargo, really, like there's some high ground that Wells Fargo wants to take. This is purely about, and this is the way I see it. Yes, they've gotten pushback from consumer groups or advocacy groups. Yes, they want to make it look like they want to do the right thing. Truthfully, when the numbers look like they're attractive enough, it's not going to make any difference. We saw that, as I said, with fracking. We saw it in the Wall Street burn down on mortgages. They knew for years what was coming, but they kept it up. We've seen it where they're actually financing terrorism. Yep. So there's really no morality here.
Well, exactly. And the reason the banks think this is a safer group to pull out of than the fracking or any of the others is because they see that something's going to happen with the private prisons. We know that there's more assaults there. It actually costs taxpayers more to put prisoners in private prisons. So they see on the horizon there is likely going to be some kind of changes with the private prison industry because of how bad it is. And they're getting out while it's hot, and they're using the cover of, the public wants us out, so we're doing what the public wants.
Well, here's what's important. It's a $4 billion industry, $4 billion a year industry already. Right now, the private banks, the private housing or private prisons are about 8% of the prisons. They see that climbing every year. So we're going to see them back. This is kind of a show.
Yeah.
A Peruvian farmer traveled across the globe to file a lawsuit against the German energy company RWE over greenhouse emissions. He says the company should have to pay for the toll climate change is taking on his community. Legal journalist Molly Barrows with the National Trial Lawyer magazine has more. Why should the community have to pay for it? Shouldn't the company who caused it pay for it?
Yes.
Isn't that kind of the question we ask all the time
Yes.
about why is it that we're letting these companies externalize all the costs and all the problems, and then they're taking all the profits and leaving us with this disaster?
And saying it's a political problem.
Yeah. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's fascinating. I think this could very well set a good precedent, one that's needed. You have a lot of organizations like cities and counties which are suing these individual energy companies, but this is the first guy who's brought an individual lawsuit. And he's from the Andes Mountains in Peru, surrounded by glaciers, and you can see that they're visibly starting to deteriorate. And he's basing his suit on a study that was done by an organization that found that this particular company, so he filed against RWE in Germany. He traveled all the way to Germany in 2015 to file this lawsuit. And at first it was dismissed, and then it was revived 3 years later. Basically, a higher court in Germany ruled that he did have legal ground to bring this suit. And so it is being pursued in that regard. But basically, he's saying, you know, your company, this study that was done found that your company is 0.5% responsible for the greenhouse gases that are being emitted. So I want to hold you 0.5% responsible for paying for the risks to prevent flooding, or paying to prevent, you know, whatever it takes to shore up a town in his community.
He can quantify the damage, just like we did on tobacco. As you know, our law firm handled the tobacco litigation.
Yes.
We looked at each company, said, you have this much of the market. This is what you should have to pay for this particular bill. It's easy to quantify. What I like about this is it's taking place in Germany.
Yes.
I like that we have a better, can you imagine that we've become, our judicial system has become so cranked, it's become so peculiar that we have to go to Germany to handle something as significant as this. And as I look at it, as I compare notes on what his possibilities are over there, he's got a better possibility in Germany than he has in the United States.
Right. And the reason he even went to Germany is his lawsuit's being supported by a nonprofit called German Watch Group. And basically, he gave tours in his little town in the Andes, and he met a tourist there who said, you're right, your town is at risk. You know, they've had problems with flooding from a lake that was fed by glaciers before as the glacier started to deteriorate. So they feel like this is their real, you know, danger of this particular lake being impacted by this glacier. So when you talk to this tourist said, why don't you look into this organization? So they are supporting him in his efforts to bring this, because they recognize that, again, you have, whether it's this man's community or communities all across the country, all across the world, they're facing flooding issues from this. And if they open this door,
here's what I really like about this: the trial that takes place, if he can get that far, it won't be a jury trial. It'll be what we call a bench trial, a judge trial. This will be several administrative judges probably that will decide. They'll listen to the science. They'll listen to the case in a different kind of way that a jury would. And they'll make decisions that will have a huge impact on any subsequent cases that are brought around the world. It's going to be admissible, for example, in Germany, if there's particular findings where he says, yes, I told you I could quantify the amount of damage that was caused by this company. Here it is. We can break it down. There's no guesswork here. It's very specific. When he can get to that point, then we can then borrow that in the United States and say, here's the formula.
And that's what they're hoping for. And in fact, the court has appointed 2 hydrology experts who are going to go to this guy's community, take a look at measure the risk essentially from the glacier, then determine what role climate change is playing in that risk. And then again, boiling down to if it's not universally rooted well, that's the argument. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. But basically, they're going to take a look at these hydrology experts are going to take a look at a situation and evaluate if this particular company, you know, if climate change was involved, did this particular company play a role on it? And so that's where some folks are saying the suit may not have much of a chance, and that you can't prove that a specific company is specifically responsible for this specific climate change.
Let me talk about that just a second. It's always we can't, don't do it. Usually the people that are feeding that line is corporate America.
You're right.
You can't prove. We heard the same thing on tobacco. We've heard it on pharmaceutical case after pharmaceutical case. I heard it in the environmental case I tried up in the Ohio River Valley. You can't prove this. No, you can prove it. There are experts that can take it down to look. We can put a man on the moon.
Right.
We can send a rocket to Mars. You don't think experts can figure out how much damage was done by this company, what impact that had, quantify the impact, and say, you know what? The bill is $80 billion, and you know what? You're responsible for 0.5% of this. Easily done. This is not, this idea, it's just beyond us, is such a ridiculous argument.
Right, and he's only asking for $20,000. That's 0.5% of the bill. If you're 0.5% the contributor of this problem, then he's saying we need $20,000 to shore up this town from flooding that could be potentially caused
I don't care if it's 20,000, 10,000, 80 billion.
Yeah.
What's going to come out of it, hopefully, if it goes right, is some precedent that we can't use directly, but we can use a lot of the information that comes out of it.
Well, I'm excited for him. I hope it moves forward.
Me too. Thanks for joining me, okay?
Thanks, Pat.
Every year, 1 million hernia surgeries are performed in the United States. Unfortunately, some mesh implants that are used in these surgeries have caused complications, including infection and organ damage that led to surgeries to correct those problems. If this has happened to you, learn more about the hernia mesh lawsuit by going online to hernia.law or call us for a free consultation about your legal rights.